the international community is acting vigorously, not as magicians, but as real human beings with one purpose: to stop the bloodshed. The German foreign minister is in the region. A British minister has been in the region. Mr. Solana has been in the region. The Secretary General's team has been in the region. We are working day and night for this, but we cannot produce miracles. But I do hope that within days, hopefully, we will be able to come up with a package which can motivate the parties to act consistent with the will of the Security Council.
Let me go to Jerusalem now. Professor Gerald Steinberg joins us now. Mr. Roed-Larsen, talking there of miracles, many would say, Professor Steinberg, that the disarming of Hezbollah, the dismantling of Hezbollah would be a miracle, that in fact Israel can weaken them but not entirely crush them.
I don't think it's useful to talk about miracles. What we need to talk about is reality, and I've been listening to this show along with many other people for half an hour. I don't think anybody said Iran or Syria or talked about 14,000 missiles that Hezbollah has in its stockpile. Talk about the huge amount of concrete. When we were watching Jan Egeland, the humanitarian coordinator for the UN, he was walking on the area of Beirut that had huge concrete bunkers underneath, Hezbollah's command center. Why didn't he say that? Why didn't he say the humanitarian disaster was us? We in the UN failed to blow the alarm when we knew this was coming. We knew these missiles were here. We knew this terrorist base was being built in Lebanon, and we were silent. That's the humanitarian disaster. Of course, Israel's going to defend its security, its survival, its population, and the failure to even discuss that is really very problematic. We're not looking for miracles. Let's have a little bit of realism, and the realism is going to be when the European countries, when Mr. Larsen, when the leaders that are all here stop talking in cliches and start talking about preventing Syria and Iran from resupplying Hezbollah. It's true, 14,000 missiles, a few thousand terrorists are not going to be disarmed immediately. Unfortunately, every time a missile flies from Tyre in Lebanon, kills some Israelis, the Israeli Air Force has the obligation to destroy that missile launcher. Let's tell the truth to the people. That's what's going on. It was the silence, and we have to end the silence, and we have to deal with the reality. And that's going to be very, very difficult. Perhaps NATO can do it. Perhaps some other force can do it. But the UN has been a total failure. It's been very well-meaning in many cases. Mr. Larsen has learned a lot from his experience in the Middle East and says the right things now, unlike in 2002. He is even-handed, but it takes a lot more than that. And unfortunately, as he's pointed out, until UN Resolution 1559 is implemented, until Hezbollah is disarmed, having a ceasefire now means even greater fighting in the future, and perhaps in Iran with a nuclear bomb, much, much dangerous for the world.
Professor Steinberg, you mentioned there the concerns over Iran and Syria. Let's get the view from Tehran. We can go there now. We have Hannah, who joins us via a webcam, a unique piece of technology being used for us for the first time on Have Your Say. Hannah, thank you for joining us. What are your concerns in Iran?
Actually, I suppose as an Iranian, in my generation, we are all afraid of war. I mean, it's very frightening if the war comes here, if attacks Syria. But the thing is that what we think as young generation in Iran, I suppose it's what we can say from emotional part, we want peace all over the world. But from the logical part, it's better to be realistic, I suppose, to understand it's not between Muslims and Jews. It's not between Lebanon and Israel. It has many sides, many parts. Many countries has benefits in it. And I suppose being a bit realistic would be much better, because nobody said that it's going to be something that everybody has benefits in it. And I don't know. We want peace. We don't want another war. We were born in war, and now we don't want another one, actually.
But Hannah, how are people in Iran responding to these accusations that Iran has helped mastermind this current situation?
In Iran, there are many points of view. Actually, there are ones who are supporting Palestine and Lebanon and Hezbollah, and I mean, the way they think is that, okay, we want them free, we want peace out there. But the general thing is that we don't want anything to happen. We want everything to be stopped. We want peace in the whole region.
Hannah, thank you for joining us via the webcam from Tehran. It was great to hear a young person's point of view there who is in Iran about the situation in the Middle East, concerned there that the conflict will be getting wider, and that's something we're going to talk about further. But let's go to Dubai now and join Anas, who's on the phone. Anas, what point would you like to make?
Actually, first of all, I'd like to talk about the establishment of Hezbollah and Hamas, why they were established to begin with. I think in '82, when Israel reached Beirut and occupied most of Lebanon, there was no army. Basically, Lebanon has a very small very small army. It's around 40,000 soldiers who are not very well equipped. Basically, they have M16s probably and some bulletproof vehicles. So that's after that invasion, there was a need for someone to resist in future invasion. So I think that's why where Hezbollah came out and started their own sort of army. The same thing with Hamas. There is nobody to stop Israel occupation or aggression against the Lebanese and the Palestinian people. The second thing is the UN's failure is, UN is a failure thanks to Israel's repeated non-compliance with all resolutions that were supposed to be implemented by Israel.
London, if you can hear me, I think the statement from Hannah in Iran was very important, and I'd like to be able to respond to that.
Professor Steinberg in Jerusalem. Go ahead.
Yes, I thought that Hannah's statement in Tehran was extremely encouraging, because it does say that there are people in Tehran who are not calling for wiping Israel off the map, who are not marching through the streets yelling death to Israel, and are not sending rockets and missiles to kill Israelis or anybody else through Lebanon and other places. What we don't have are any diplomatic relations with Iran. Hannah cannot talk to my students who are in her age group and discover the common humanity amongst them. They can't at all talk to each other and their mutual fears because Iran refuses to recognize Israel. It wants to wipe Israel off the map. That's the president's terminology of Iran.
But
I think if the UN wants to do something useful, I think it's important for it to go forward and to develop a framework where Iranians and Israelis and Syrians and Lebanese can all sit down and talk together on an equal basis without the hatred, without the violence, without the threats. That's what the Middle East is missing. That's really the core issue. It's asking for a lot. I don't think it's going to happen as a result of this conflict, but there's a very important direction that needs to be taken before the violence gets much worse.
Professor Steinberg, thank you for that. We've got more phone calls coming in from Israel. We're joined by Archie Grano, who's there. What would you like to say, Archie?
Well, Mr. Larsen said much of what I wanted to say, but the present situation, Israel moved back to the international border in 2000. This is one of the few occasions when the United Nations actually gave Israel, in parentheses, a pat on the back. And we assumed that with Hezbollah going into the political scene in Lebanon, that there would be a cessation, that this was an international border that was agreed on. We were attacked. It wasn't just an abduction of soldiers. It was a coordinated attack across the whole of the northern border of Israel. And with all the will in the world, I don't think that we had any choice but to respond. The comparisons between now and 1982 are not good comparisons. I had thought after the Oslo Agreement, I had thought that we were getting to a time. I remember where I was when the Oslo Agreement was agreed on. I was coming around the side of the old city and all the Palestinian flags appeared, and I wanted to get out of the car and jump with joy and say, we've done it. But the truth is there is a major element, not the majority, but there is a major element in the Muslim world that does not want peace with Israel under any circumstances. Not the regular guy on the street. I'm sure that regular people like Anna in Tehran would find a way to find a commonality with regular people in Israel. But the truth is that there are people out there in the Muslim world, Hezbollah wants to destroy Israel. They are a legitimate political party in Lebanon. But when it comes to Israel, they wish to destroy Israel. Hamas is a legitimate party in the Palestinian Authority, but when it comes to Israel, they want to destroy it. And I don't know what we can do. We have to defend ourselves.
Professor Steinberg actually brings up the point there about the ordinary Arab or Muslim on the streets, and yet surely Israel's action is not helping to win the hearts and minds of those moderate Muslims.
I think one of the problems that we have in all of this good advice that we get from international diplomats, and your point is well taken, is that nobody offers an alternative. Nobody says, you know, we're going to help you defend yourself. We're going to prevent Hezbollah from using those 14,000 missiles. We're not going to let them build these deep concrete bunkers so they can wheel out the missiles, shoot at you, and wheel it back in, so you're going to have to use your Air Force and your tank crews and everybody else to get those terrorists out of there. So saying that this is not very useful doesn't mean that there's an alternative that somebody's put on the table. That's the big failure of the UN. That's the huge failure of the European diplomats. That's what we call the international community at the beginning. The question was raised. They do not present realistic alternatives. It's a lot of talk. Some of it is well-intentioned. Some of it is blind to the reality. You've got to present Israel and the Lebanese and the entire area with realistic alternatives, and there have not been realistic alternatives. So saying this will lead to bad things doesn't really solve the problem, because not doing anything when Hezbollah is waging war as a proxy for Tehran, and there's so much danger. We've had 3 years of negotiations on Iran's nuclear weapons policy. Europe went in and was going to negotiate, the European leadership. All we've done is giving them more time. That's not an alternative.
And yet
saying we have to find a diplomatic solution is not an alternative.
To represent the many emails we've had that criticize Israel's disproportionate use of force. And Terje Roed-Larsen, Jan Egeland, your man in Beirut today, also condemned what he said was the disproportionate use of force. People are simply saying the wheels of change, the wheels of diplomacy are not moving fast enough.
You know, I know
Mr.
some of the
Roed-Larsen,
young men...
if I can address that to you.
Yes, let me first say I think there's lots of misunderstandings here, because the UN is not silent on basically all of the issues which have been discussed for the last few minutes. We have brought up repeatedly in the Security Council, which has been endorsed by presidential statements, arms smuggling to Hezbollah and other armed groups in Lebanon, which are a clear violation of relevant Security Council resolutions. And we've said it again and again and again. But it will not have an impact unless the parties agree with us, and apparently it doesn't have an impact. And the UN has no means in order to enforce on these issues. The year 2000 was a watershed event in Lebanese-Israeli relations, because then Israel ended its occupation in Lebanon unanimously, endorsed by the Security Council. However, the so-called blue line, the line of withdrawal between Lebanon and Israel, has been violated by both parties again and again and again. So the issue is not decisions of the Security Council. They made the right decisions, and they made also the right decision by confirming that Israel actually had withdrawn from Lebanon. Then there's been a call for the disbanding and disarming of militias, for a deployment of the armed forces, the Lebanese armed forces in the south, for Israel to stop its overflights over Lebanon. It doesn't happen. And the UN as an organization does not have the means to do that. It's only the parties who can do it. So again, the Security Council and the other organs of the UN is a necessary condition under international law to reach international peace and security, but it's not sufficient.
David Hassan.
This is why we also have to address address the parties here. And in this case, what started the war, it's all apparent, and there is no ambiguity here, that this was in a clear violation of the Security Council resolution when Hezbollah crossed the blue line, abducted the soldiers and killed other Israeli soldiers. This started the war. This was a reckless act and in complete contradiction with several relevant Security Council Security Council resolutions. But the challenge now is to repair this, to ask Hezbollah to stop firing on Israel, to ask Israel to halt its attacks. But again, this is not enough in itself, because we have to make this sustainable, because this is the only way of stopping the maiming and the killing and the bloodshed and the destruction of this beautiful and wonderful country of Lebanon.
David Hassan, you join us on the phone from London. You also want to address this issue of the disbanding of Hezbollah in southern Lebanon.
Yes, I actually have 3 points to make, but just to continue from what the previous gentleman said, I think this is just another chapter in a long and sad history of the region And the region came very close to a full peace under the Clinton-Barak-Arafat agreement, but to